With so many discs out on the market, there always seems to be a few molds that just fly completely under the radar. Now, there are a few different reasons for that. It could either be that like it just was a quiet release and not enough people heard about it, or it's just so old and more new stuff comes out that it kind of just gets forgotten about, even though like those molds are still really good. So today I thought we'd look at a few of those molds that I think just not enough people are talking about, and I have a couple of these discs that fall in like both sides of that category, that it just didn't get enough recognition on the release of it, or the disc has just been out so long that it's just new shinier molds have like moved the limelight off of them. So let's get into it. We're gonna kick it all off with this disc, because this is kind of the disc that sparked this whole video idea. So oh, please get it. So this is a Fugitive. You see, the Fugitive just recently came out, like maybe like a couple months ago. And I think a lot of like the release hype around it kind of died, because this was originally like one of DD's first molds. It was released as like an understable mid-range, and it wasn't great. Like, it was shaped like a rock, but it was just understable. Almost, I think they were trying to go for like a Comet type disc, but it was a little shallow and it was just a little finicky. So when they wanted to release the Supreme line, they wanted to release the 4 original molds, one of them being the Fugitive. But since the Fugitive was out of production, it didn't really go over too well, they actually retooled it, and this is like a brand new Fugitive. Technically they had to retool all the other Supreme molds, but for those they like tried to mimic what the other molds were. This one, they didn't. They wanted to go for something completely different. And what they made is probably like the most fun mid-range I have thrown in a long time. Like, this is nice and beefy, but it's not too beefy. Like, I really haven't thrown anything like it. Like, it flies fast and straight, but it still has like a beefy finish at the end, and it fights the winds really, really well. And Noodle Arm Chris on Twitter actually asked me like a really good question about it, of like how it compares to the Malta, because it actually looks pretty similar to the Malta. And I said like, this is what I thought the Malta was going to be, because the Malta was advertised as like an overstable mid-range, and at least the Proto that I threw was not really that. It was really weird, because it had the glide of an overstable mid-range, but the hookup wasn't there. Like, it had the stability of like a standard rock or buzz, but it had a lot less glide, as if it was supposed to be an overstable mid-range. So like, it might have changed recently with the newer runs, but that was my experience with the Protos. This one is like what I thought the Malta was going to be, like an overstable fast mid-range that you can really lean on in a lot of conditions. Now, I wouldn't call this like the most overstable mid-range you'll ever throw. If you look at it, it's shaped kind of like a Justice on the edge here. Like, it almost looks like a Justice, but it's actually a little more comfortable. Like, you can see it's a little bit domey on the top instead of like really flat, and it's just a little bit more comfortable to hold, which I really like that about it. So it's not going to be like that utility mid-range, but it's like that step below, almost like a faster zone type disc. And I've honestly just like, I don't know why, I've never really been a huge like really overstable mid-range guy. I carried a Justice in my bag for a long time, but it actually happened at the NAGGT Nationals. We played in like 45-mile-per-hour winds. Robbie can vouch for me, he was there. But that entire round, like, I had my Justice in my bag, never reached for it. I don't know why. Like, I always just went to my zone, my Firebird, or like an overstable Rock 3 if I needed something a little further and less overstable than a zone. But I never really like found myself needing that short and beefy of a mid-range. I don't know why. So after that round, I was like, if I'm not reaching for this disc in 45-mile-per-hour winds, why am I carrying it in my bag and carrying the weight? So took it out. But I really think that this would be a really nice addition to my bag. To me, it's like just as useful as a Justice type disc is, but it has more usefulness outside of those areas. Like, it's just a more useful Justice, because it's just a tick less overstable, flies further. Like, this consistently shocks me at how far this throws every time I throw it. I don't know, I just think this is a disc that just flew under the radar, and more people should be talking about it and like trying it at least. And I do have more DD discs, but this next one we're going with another company, and it's not really a specific disc. It's more kind of like a like class or group of discs. And the like category of discs I'm mainly talking about is legacy discs, mainly their Pinnacle line fairway drivers, which I think they have like completely dialed. And there's 3 main drivers that I'm talking about. I'm mainly talking about like the Rival, the Patriot, and the Phenom. And Legacy started, I think, around like 2012, 2013, around the same time that DD did, but instead of going the route of like having another manufacturer make their discs, they decided to make their own, starting from scratch. It was like Steve Rico and his brother out in California doing their thing. And when they first like released their Pinnacle plastic, for example, like the Rival and the Patriot were some of their first molds, the Pinnacle plastic was very different than what it is now. Like it wasn't even clear. It was more of an opaque plastic, but since then they've dialed it pretty nicely. Like now their Pinnacle plastic is pretty translucent. It's still a little opaque, but it's a lot more translucent. And just their Pinnacle plastic just feels so good now. Like I would almost describe it like an old Jolly Launcher type plastic from Innova, but the Jolly Launcher plastic was almost like sticky, when this one it has the grip, but it's not sticky by any means. And I would say it's not quite as stiff, so it's not like rock solid like some of the Jolly Launcher drivers were. And I honestly really like it, and I think it's come out to be some of the best plastic on the market. Now the Rival here is like their T-Bird type mold. It is very reminiscent of a T-Bird. It has the sharp rim and the little lip on here on the edge. I don't know if you can see that. Like I don't know if that's showing up much on camera, but it has that little lip here on the edge, just like a T-Bird. They are very reminiscent of like classic Innova molds. So like this Rival is like their T-Bird, the Patriot is like a Leopard, but this Patriot in Pinnacle plastic was much more overstable than I had originally remembered. Like I think once you break it in, it'll be a very nice hyzer flip tunnel shot type disc, but in this Pinnacle plastic was pretty overstable. Like I threw it like a slight hyzer to flat in a wind, and it hyzer flips, turned a little bit, but came back at the end. That's not the Patriot I remember, but these are so nice when you break them in to have that perfect hyzer flip tunnel shot disc. Now the Patriot and Rival were some of the first molds they came out with, and this is one of their newer ones, I think. The Phenom, I don't know exactly when it came out, but this one I would describe as like if the Leopard was a 9-speed disc. It's almost like an Undertaker if Innova made the Undertaker. There's no plus rim on it, so if you don't like that other Undertaker, it's nice. But the rim is just like a deeper Undertaker, and is a pretty safe rim. And this one just like hyzer flips, slight turn maybe, and it gives you a fade back. This is just really nice. Now I do have a video on the channel about the Shattered Phenom, and that's like their Pinnacle plastic with like the glitter in it, like metal flakes if you want to call it that. And those are honestly like really nice compliments to the straight Pinnacle Phenoms. Like all of their Champ type plastic, they've just nailed out of the park. Like their Icon is kind of like their Star plastic. I like prefer like a normal Star or like the new Royal Grand plastic over that. But like their Pinnacle plastic, their clear plastic, like I know it's a subjective thing and an opinion, but I just don't think anyone's really beating it right now. Now we are talking about 4 discs total in this video, and the third is the DGA Breaker. Now I know some of you might be thinking that I would talk about the Jokery in this slot, but I think this one is even more underrated than the Jokery. You see, the Jokery is like actually pretty popular among like the infinite throwers, the ones who can throw an open bag. But DGA, I think a lot of their stuff flies under the radar, and I have like a theory behind it. Granted, it's just a theory. I think DGA gets like a kind of, not bad rap, but they're just not as big for a couple of different reasons. One, I think it's because they're one of the oldest companies in disc golf. And while that alone might not be that big of a deal, I think that combined with the fact that they didn't really have like a big name player on tour on their sponsored team for a long time. Like they had Cam Todd, who is like an absolute legend, but he was never really like a dominant force on tour, like when Innova had Paul McBeth. And now, even though people think that they don't have very many pros, they keep letting him go, they still have Calvin Heimberg, who is probably one of, if not the best player in disc golf at the moment. Not only that, their discs, I think, are just overshadowed by the company who manufactures them, being Discraft. And I think they were one of the first to like have another manufacturer making their discs. And the only other company that was doing it at the time was Innova. And the way Innova did it, and still kind of does it, with the exception of Discmania, they took a lot of their like quote unquote lower end molds or other different molds that they just were willing to let go, and they just stamped them with a new name. For example, with Millennium, like the Scorpius is literally just an old mold of the Destroyer. Or for Infinite discs, like all of their molds are old Innova molds, or even old Discmania molds, now that Discmania's moved on to other things. And so I think a lot of people looked at DGA, myself included, and it was just like, well, isn't this just a Discraft mold? And it wasn't even until like I met Tyler Brickley at Worlds where I legit asked him, I was like, is it more like Innova in the sense that these are just Discraft molds that they're stamping for you guys, or is this actually like more of the trilogy thing where Latitude 64 makes completely new molds for dynamic discs and like West Side type discs? And he said it was the latter. So like these are completely different molds, which I didn't even know myself, which I feel like that's a big reason why people have gone away from these. But the breaker is solid. It's so good. It is very similar to that like Jokery type disc, to where it's like that in between like a stable putter, like putting putter, and your like zone type disc. It's that perfect in between. So like something where you don't want the hookup of the zone, maybe it's not as windy, but you still want that dependability on like either the backhand or even the forehand. You just don't want the hookup. This is a great disc for it. Now, the one thing that I do think would deter people from this disc would be the feel in the hand, because it's actually quite shallow of a disc, and it has like a beaded rim right here and kind of like a thumb track to it. So it feels, in my opinion, it takes a little bit of getting used to in the hand feel for it. It's just a lot shallower than it looks, but it's actually really comfortable on forehands and backhands. I think that's the biggest thing that you would have to get used to, is the feel. But once you do, this thing just flies beautifully. Like you can really just crank on this disc and depend on it and trust that it's not really gonna turn over at all. It's just gonna just fly dead straight for a very long time, however hard you rip on it, and it's gonna give you a fade at the end. Now the glide isn't quite there. Like I think if you throw like a normal throwing, like normal putter, it might go further than this. But I mean, at the same time, like that's really nice for an approach disc. It's like I wouldn't say it's like a Berg in the sense of that, but it's nice and stable. You can trust on it, and it's stable enough to give good forehands and have more of that like straight finish with a little bit of hookup at the end. I love my zones, but discs like this, like the Jokery in my bag, get so much more use day to day and round to round than my zone really ever does. So it's definitely worth a try at least. Now the last disc on my list is another one from DD. It is the Evader. And this one I wouldn't call new per se, but I also wouldn't call it old either. It lies like in between both of the two reasons why it might have been forgotten. Now the Evader is like DD's T-Bird type disc, but I really think I think it's what a lot of amateurs think the T-Bird would be for them, because the T-Bird is actually like pretty overstable for most people, at least for like normal amateurs between like the intermediate-ish range. And I think the Evader is closer to what a lot of amateurs think the T-Bird is. This wind is messing with my hair in bad ways. See, the Evader has like a similar feel to the T-Bird, but I think it's like a touch less stable, and because of that it pushes forward more and flies straight for longer, but it still gives you that finish at the end. Now, one of the reasons why I think it might have been not as popular when it released was when people said it was a less stable T-Bird. They were like, well, I don't want that. It's not gonna fight winds like a T-Bird would. But that is like, this just surprised me with how stable it was in wind. Like there are multiple winds where I looked at it and I was like, this is for sure gonna turn over my Evader. But the Evader like hyzer flipped up, stayed dead straight, didn't turn over, and then gave me that little like finish at the end. It just stayed laser straight. And I'm talking like 20 to 25 mile per hour winds, which is all you would really want a T-Bird to fight. Granted, like a T-Bird can get more overstable than that, and that is nicer for when the winds get up to like 35 to 40 miles per hour. You can get a very straight shot with those. But these Evaders are like, just saying that they're less stable T-Birds does not take away the value of how good of a disc this is, in my opinion. Now, another reason why I think they might have not gone over as well is the feel. This is very similar to a T-Bird. If you can see the rim, it's very similar to a T-Bird, but it's actually like a little more rounded off here. Like it doesn't have like this lip here. It's done to like a straight edge, so it doesn't have that little like bead or lip at the edge of the wing here, which I talked about that in another one of my videos. It's an old video and it's honestly pretty bad, but I talk about the bead on the wing. But I think a lot of people were a little turned off because this actually feels quite a bit smaller in the hand than a T-Bird. Now for some people they might like that, like if you have smaller hands, the T-Bird actually feels like pretty big in the hand for some people. This would feel smaller and give you like a cleaner release than a normal T-Bird would. It also feels really good for forehands because of that shallower rim, but that might have another reason why this might not have been as popular. And that's really all of them that I had. If I were to say an honorable mention, I think I would say the EMAC Judge, because I've really been driving with these, both like putting and throwing. That like these can handle like a pretty good amount of power and fly pretty straight and not really turn over for me. So it's a really nice throwing and putting putter. But yeah, when you think of like underrated discs, like what do you think like are discs that are out there that just don't get enough love? Let me know in the comments. And all of these discs will be linked in the description for you to check out. Most of them will be at apollodiscgolf.com, but some of them, like the Breaker, are not. So, but I'll have an affiliate link, and that I should get a kickback if you use that, and it'll help support the channel. Anyways, so yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. You see, this is a Fugitive. All right.